I'm a mouthy broad who's been nominated for Mouthy Broad Awards. I've got 3 books on the shelves and 3 more on the way, and I'm just getting started, and I'm good enough at being a mouthy broad that your school is paying me actual money to come talk to you about the risks that come with being a mouthy broad and why it's worth it.
Internationally published author of fiction and nonfiction, Sarah Gailey is known for writing in the sci-fi genre, creating either dystopian worlds or magical ones. Her latest book, The Echo Wife, however, is rooted in the world we know today. The fictional story of Evelyn Caldwell, renowned genetic researcher whose ex-husband, Nathan, has used Evelyn's research to clone Evelyn herself.
This is highly unethical. This is illegal. This is a miracle, Martine said. Her smile was beatific. She was glowing. I wanted to incinerate her.
A life is a dangerous thing to share. Joining Sarah Gailey in conversation is the Spokesman-Review's local writ columnist and literature reporter, Stephanie Hammett. We are thrilled to host this conversation with Sarah Gailey on our Northwest Passages virtual stage.
Good evening and welcome to this virtual gathering of the Northwest Passages book club. Stephanie Hammett. I write on local arts and literature for The Spokesman. And so I think you can see why I would be so excited to be talking to Sarah Gailey this evening about their wild and wonderful new novel, The Echo Wife. Sarah, welcome. And how are you doing this evening?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here talking to you.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. I finished reading the book for the second time today, so it's very much in my mind, and I enjoyed it, I think, even more reading it the second time, despite some of the, the gorier sections of the book. Before we get into that, how have you been feeling creatively in the pandemic? Have you been finding it more difficult to write?
I mean, it's been up and down. I've definitely had moments of immense inspiration, especially in my nonfiction work. I tend to turn to work as an escape from hard feelings. And so I've been very productive this past year. Yesterday was actually my 1-year anniversary of being in lockdown. And I've definitely had a lot of things to write about and to escape from, but at the same time, obviously the stress of pandemic isn't conducive to artistic creation. Certainly isn't a boon to my mental health.
Yeah, right there with you. What would you say you're most looking forward to once we sort of come out of all of this?
Oh my gosh, traveling. For sure. Before this all happened, I had a really robust travel schedule. I especially loved getting to go and visit independent bookstores all around the country. That was like one of my favorite parts of my job and my life, and I can't wait to get back to it. I really miss airplane snacks.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Let's see. I think I should do a couple of questions about the book, but I think I should probably read a little synopsis for any listeners who haven't read the book. So Martine is a genetically cloned replica made from Evelyn Caldwell's award-winning research. She's patient and gentle and obedient. She's everything Evelyn swore she'd never be. Fair with Evelyn's husband. Now the cheat is dead, and both Caldwell wives have a mess to clean up. Good thing Evelyn Caldwell is used to getting her hands dirty. Reading that my first question might seem a little bit less, I don't know. It's not going to be about the gore. So while I was going through my notes today, it struck me for the first time today, sort of an idea of where you got the name for the book. Is it something to do with the myth of Echo and Narcissus?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I love this. I mean, I could make myself sound so much smarter than I am right now. by saying, yes, I was definitely making references to that legend and, you know, trying to build in a bunch of layers of reference for the title. That hadn't even occurred to me until just now, but I love it so much, especially because the relationship between Echo and Narcissus so closely, if you'll pardon me, echoes the relationships in this book.
Yeah, it's like right on the money. I mean, also Echo and Narcissus, Evelyn and Nathan. I think it was sort of subconsciously there while you were writing. It must have been.
I'm just going to take this. I'm going to have us delete this footage, erase the memories of everyone who watched it, and then I can go into other interviews and be like, well, I really wanted to be discussing the myth of Narcissus and Echo. And I'm going to sound super smart, all because of you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's okay. We'll take it out in post. I'll ask the question again. Yeah. Okay. So in the intro trailer, you refer to yourself as a mouthy broad. And I love that. Evelyn, I wouldn't exactly describe her as a mouthy broad, but she definitely, you know, suffers no fool, and she's certainly not scared to speak her mind when she really wants to, even though she is super aware of how much all the men around her look down on her work, except for Syed, but there's, you know, he's got his own problems. Basically, I want to ask why you think everyone is so afraid of the non-male voice, Evelyn, in literature and in life. So yeah, basically.
I love this question, especially because my relationship with this idea has changed so much since that video was taken. The video of me referring to myself as a mouthy broad is from 2017 from a speaking tour I did in Utah. And that particular lecture was one that I gave at a university about the fear of the female voice in myth and in history and in reality, at a time in my life when I still identified as female, and at a time in my life when I was kind of first starting to get a foothold as a voice in online spaces, and I was experiencing all of the harassment that comes with that, a really high volume of death threats and threats of physical and interpersonal and sexual violence. And I was so nervous when I gave that lecture because I didn't really go to any kind of traditional college, and I was going and speaking to these college students and needed to like own my authority on the subject. And you can hear my voice shaking in that video. It's so funny to revisit. And at the time, my perspective was that, you know, society and culture there's a fear of female voices that comes from a fear of being out of control of those voices. And I don't disagree with my past self on that at all. My biggest shift in perspective is including all marginalized genders in that concept. I think that there's a huge fear culturally that if people who are members of marginalized genders speak up too much, people might listen, and that's awfully scary. As a non-binary person, I have to decide if I'm willing to take that risk every time that I decide to talk about just about anything. And, you know, my trans brothers and sisters face the same thing, as do so many women around the world. I think that fear really comes from a fear of change of the status quo. And people who are members of marginalized genders can fear that too. You know, there's a huge contingent of people who identify very strongly as cisgender female who are terrified of the notion of people of other marginalized genders having a voice, because what might change, what might change about their world and their worldview. Some people are very threatened by that concept.
Yeah. You just let me know if you don't want to talk about this, but are you referring to J.K. Rowling?
I'm referring to her whole gang.
Yeah.
It's a real shame. And, you know, as someone who really kind of had the start of my career in using Harry Potter books as a lens through which to discuss the way that people could respond to the growing political climate at that moment in the United States. Boy, I have a weird relationship with that lady and her work.
I mean, think of Harry Potter, and they go back to it in the same way that a lot of texts, when they're going through hard times, and then you have the just like ruining it for everyone. Following up on the last question, what would you say is the most gained by letting you?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit on my end. Could you say that again?
Oh, absolutely. What would you say is the most valuable thing that you've gained by letting yourself be a mouthy broad?
Everything. Absolutely everything.
Yeah.
So much of the Echo Wife is a reflection of that moment, because when I was on that speaking tour, that was 3 days after I pitched my literary agent on the concept of the Echo Wife. So this was all happening very much at the same time for me. And so much of this book comes out of my journey from being someone who is very afraid to use my voice to someone who is confident in using my voice. It's completely changed my life. Being willing to accept that I have things to say and that I don't need to be afraid to say those things has been completely transformative, and is the reason that my life is what it is now. I'm a completely different person in many ways, and so much happier because I stopped being afraid of people who might not like what I have to say.
Yeah, I imagine that's pretty freeing. And sorry, going back to my pet theory about, in the myth, Echo can't speak. Like, her voice is totally, and so you've sort of given Echo back her in the Echo Wife.
Oh, I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's pretty nice myself. What would you say is the biggest
I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with my connection. I heard, what do you think is the biggest misconception? And then could have been anything after that. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Misconception about you?
Oh, gosh. Oh, that's a terrifying question. I mean, I think the biggest misconception probably comes from people who have known me over time. I've had a pretty traumatic life in a lot of ways. And for a long period of my life, that made me a very hard person. I was in a state of needing to protect myself for a long time. And I've turned into this like huge softie in the time since. And every now and then I'll meet someone who knew me like, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, and they'll refer to like ways that I thought and behaved that don't at all fit with me now. And that's because now I'm this like sweater wearing, gardening grandpa, instead of being someone who, wants to go out and ride motorcycles and smoke cigars and get in trouble all day.
So related one in the before times. Whereas now you've maybe taken on a little bit more of Martine's, softness and, the other patience. I don't know. The other things that Evelyn can't stand.
Yeah.
So you've written in several genres over the years, and among them adult lit and young adult lit. When a story idea comes to you, how do you know whether it's a story that you want to write for adults or young adults?
Oh, they're completely different for me. I approach young adult literature kind of as like a healing for my past self, and I approach adult literature as kind of a confrontation of the present. And so the ideas originate from completely different places and don't really meet at all. My young adult debut, When We Were Magic, is this story about friendship and compassion, and wouldn't at all fit into what I want to write for adults. What I want to write for, what I write for adults and for young adults can really be separated by that phrase, I'm here to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I'm trying to provide so much comfort to young adult readers who I think are going through more than they should ever have to. And then I want my adult books to really confront whatever is happening in the world and minds and hearts of adults.
Yeah, that very much like the job of art in general. That's fascinating, and I love. Who were your favorite authors when you were a kid, and how do you think they've influenced you? So would you recommend those same books to aspiring authors now?
Well, thank you for putting multiple layers into that question, because so many of my favorite books when I was a kid, I would not recommend to anybody now. Obviously I was the Harry Potter age. That was like the era that I grew up in. So of course I was very into those, would not necessarily recommend them now for young readers. I loved K.A. Applegate, the Animorphs series. I was like every book fair picking those up. They've influenced me immensely, and I actually started revisiting them recently. I'm co-reading them with my partner, and I would recommend them to any reader. I would recommend them to every reader. They're phenomenal. They hold up so well, and I can see exactly how they influenced me, because it's a book for young readers that has like kids change into animals, but it's also about the horrors of war and the way that violence scars those who participate in it, and the way that there can be no righteous conflict. Incredible, so nuanced and so layered. I always loved books like that didn't condescend to me as a young reader. I was very into Clive Barker's young adult fiction, which is incredible, and I knew him as the author of The Thief of Always before I ever knew him as the author of like Books of Blood. And so picking up his short stories, being like, oh wow, Clive Barker wrote more books, I'll check it out. Big wake-up call. Would powerfully recommend his young adult fiction for young readers. Would maybe recommend young readers approach his other work with some guardrails in place.
Yeah, well, I love that. It's so nice to come a book or a film or a TV show. I think those are always the best shows, like that you were saying, that don't condescend. That there's it's worth coming back to. Yeah.
That was so important to me as a young reader, to feel like the book that I was reading respected me. And it's so funny because at different times, different books managed to pull that off. Like I loved Bunnicula when I was very young, because I was like, this book isn't condescending to me. And I reread it as an adult, and so much of it holds up well. And I mean, it's not condescending to young readers, but that's because it's not written for young readers. It's written as like an inside joke between James Howe and his wife. And there's no condescension, because you're not even being considered as part of the audience.
Yeah. That's great. So I remember when we talked before for the Locally Writ article, you mentioned a part of your writing process really stuck with me, and that you different scented candle for every writing project. Could you tell me again the story of how you found the for, and like how that helps you through the process of writing?
Yes, yeah. I'm always happy to talk about this. And because I'm talking to you now, not for a newspaper article, but in more of a like conversation, I can tell you a little more extended version of that story because it's so chaotic.
Right. Yeah.
So I was in the middle of a move and living out of suitcases for a few weeks. Part of this living out of suitcases was that speaking tour in Utah. And part of it was a kind of like road trip layover situation where I was driving from place to place with a friend, and we had to wait for another friend to get off work to pick them up. And so we went and we were haunting a fabric store, now closed, called Beverly's in Alameda, rest in peace. And we were just wandering the aisles and looking at craft supplies, which is like very pleasing to the primate brain, and found these scented candles. And we were kind of like making fun of the candle scents because a lot of them were really corny and we were very punchy. And one of them was called Blue Basil. And I was like, blue basil, that's not anything. That's not a smell that exists. What does that even mean, blue basil? That's not anything. This is probably going to smell stupid. And then I picked up the candle and I smelled it, and it was like the best thing I'd ever smelled in my life. And I bought all of the blue basil candles that were there. And they were one of the things that traveled around with me as I was living out of these suitcases and like driving up to Portland and finding a place to live. I brought these blue basil candles with me. They were one of the only creature comforts I had in my little like space pod of an apartment that I was in up there. And I was writing the Echo Wife while I was in that apartment. Very lonely, very bleak situation, a lot of shiny, empty surfaces. And I would light this candle to like give me a sense of comfort and focus and warmth. And partway through writing the book, I realized that the smell of that candle made me want to write. I would smell blue basil and go, ooh, I better get to work. And since then, I've used it on every book that I've written because it works so well to trick my brain. I have like a fragrance cue that I start out in the early stages where writing the book is really fun and it's going really fast. It's really easy because it's exciting and fresh and you haven't hit the hard parts yet. And I start out lighting a new scent of candle, and that's the candle that I burn while I'm writing. And then when I get to the parts of the book that are really difficult, where I'm like, I don't want to be writing this right now, it's too hard, I've got that fragrance to kind of kick me into gear and get me focusing.
Yeah, that's that's brilliant. And honestly, I've started doing that, like just writing articles. I have a candle on my desk. I light it in the morning. I'm gonna have to get another one. We'll see if a different scent does the same thing.
I'm so glad. I hope it works great.
Yeah. I think I should do a question. We had a really great one a minute ago. So would like to know. So after viewing The Stepford Wives, my married friends did much more housework the next day. Your readers' experience to your book?
Just to clarify, was the question what I hope they'll experience or what I have been seeing them experience?
Seeing them experience it.
I am seeing a lot of people ask a lot of questions about their marriages. A lot of folks are responding to this book and I'm getting a lot of like Instagram message requests and a lot of comments on blogs saying, I read this book and now I look at my husband and I wonder what he thinks I'm for. And boy, it's haunting. I have a few friends who are in pretty unhappy relationships that they have been sticking with because that's what you do, and I've been getting a lot of late night text messages from them.
Yeah.
It's been a tough ride for some folks, but I've also gotten to see a lot of readers who feel like there's finally words for something that they've been through. I've seen a lot of readers saying, oh, now I understand why this relationship that I was in hurt me so much, which hopefully opens a door to some healing. The thing that I want most is for people to read this book and end up finding their way to relationships that nourish them and encourage them and take good care of them. But I know firsthand what a painful process that can be. And I'm sorry in advance, readers.
So how does it feel? Because so, Mark like that.
I am so sorry that I keep having to ask you to repeat yourself, but can you say that one more time?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. First, how does it feel to know that the book is a so,
This is killing me. You keep cutting out on the words that make the question.
Oh no.
How does it feel to know that the book is
affecting your readers? So
I mean, it feels incredible to know that it's having an impact. I think that there's some authors who look for a hurt reaction from readers to know that they had an impact. There's some authors who you see saying like, I know I did a good job because I made my reader cry. And that's not quite how I feel about the conversation I'm having with readers through a book.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing that it's powerful to people and knowing that it's moving is incredible, because that means that the conversation I'm having with my reader matters to them. I mean, I write all kinds of stuff. I write things that are intended strictly to entertain. I write things that are intended to be fun or just interesting. And I also write things where I'm trying to have a really serious conversation with my reader. And I know that I've succeeded in that when the reader response is something that reflects that they've been moved in some way. I ultimately want a successful book to somehow change the person reading it. I want them to walk away from the book different from how they came into it. And transformation is powerful and difficult and can be very painful. And so seeing evidence of that transformation in my readers is incredibly fulfilling, and it tells me that I'm in the right line of work, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely tracks, affected by reading the book. And it wasn't affected in a way where I was like grieving. It really made me think about was how much I watch myself in daily life, like just walking down the stairs, thinking about how I'm placing my feet, or, how graceful pour water in, something like that. Right now, not on the screen to make sure that I'm, reacting in a way that's, joyful and good and fun. I kept thinking, would I want a clone for a period of, not for a long time, but just for a period of time, to be able to see myself the way that other people see me, and do you want something that you would want to be able to experience?
I mean, yes and no. I think that we discussed this a bit when we spoke for the article that you wrote, that being in the public eye is super weird, especially as an author. Like, I don't have media training. An acting teacher once told me that I have a face for comedy or radio. Like, I don't have the poise and like the movement control for being perceived all the time. I'm also mentally ill and traumatized and anxious, and like talking in public is super weird when you're like that. And so part of me absolutely wishes that I had a way to observe myself without observing myself. Right now I'm looking at a screen where I can see my face the whole time I'm talking, and that's a nightmare dimension. But if I could look at someone who wasn't me, but who moved like me and talked like me, and I could use that as a source of study, there's this part of me that thinks that's really a really tempting idea, right? It's like, oh wow, that would be so useful. At the same time, there's a horror to perceiving yourself that thoroughly, right? The way that I perceive myself, the little flaws that I see in myself are so informed by all the things that I most fear and detest in the world. And other people don't see those things that way. I'm like, oh no, I'm holding my face at an angle where my nose is crooked in a way that this kid made fun of me in elementary school for. And you're probably, I hope you're not seeing that. If you are, we need to talk about the fact that you talked to my childhood bully. But like, other people don't care about that stuff so much. We have the ability to drive ourselves bananas by observing ourselves. And I think that having access to someone who I could depersonalize and like unperson and say, oh, this is just an object for my study, but I'm gonna use it as the totem of all of my insecurity and self-consciousness would be massively monstrous.
Yeah. I'm definitely worried that if I have the ability to, watch myself with so much, that it would just turn in on itself. It would be horrible. It's such a terrifying, I think. So clones did you have to do into the sort of sci-fi theories and, I don't know, actual science as well, before you had enough data to start crafting your story?
It's so funny. I didn't do research up front on the science behind cloning. I do this thing when I'm writing where if I hit a point in my draft where I know that I'm going to need to deep dive into something, I'll put brackets and say write something good later inside the brackets and then move on. So in this book, I really approached all the emotional beats first, all the relationships first. And I wasn't writing it thoughtfully to engage with existing clone narratives in science fiction. I was writing it kind of, ambiently in conversation with whatever I had absorbed throughout my life about those things, but I didn't go in thinking this will be in conversation with the Stepford Wives or whatever. The research came after it came time to fill in those brackets, when I realized I don't want to be writing real science. So I went ahead and made up the science, had a great time with that. I love writing fake science language. And then I put all of my research into relationships in the lab, into how the dynamics between Evelyn Caldwell, this brilliant egotistical scientist, and anyone else in her research space would go. And that was where I really focused my efforts. A lot of my other research into science fiction clone narratives came closer to publication when I started talking to people, and I would go into an interview and someone would say something brilliant like your question about whether the title and the narrative are in conversation with the myth of Echo. Like after this conversation, I'm going to be going and refreshing myself on that for future events so I can answer that more intelligently. And so that's where a lot of my research into clone narratives came. People were like, what clone narratives influenced you? And I was like, uh-oh, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, when everyone else, questioning whether or not next generation, but I kept thinking about the is having you for the of this android on the ship, Data. He eventually is able. I kept sort of equating Data and Martine because they're, both creating things that are very, very human-like, you know? And I don't know, I think it was hard for me to not think of Martine as a person. And it always really got me when Evelyn would be like, no, she's just a specimen. I'm like, no, Evelyn, you. Anyway, ever
No,
see
I
that
love
episode?
that. I love that so much. I grew up in a Star Trek household. I'm sure that Mr. Data influenced me heavily in writing Martine because there's so much beauty and poignance to his character's journey to trying to become more human. And Martine is going through exactly that. She's finally being given the opportunity to self-define, and she's like, all right, what is that going to mean for me? I love that you were struggling with that question because that tells me I did an okay job at my job as an author. All that I want is for my readers who are reading this book to have to struggle with that. Evelyn's narrative isn't perfectly reliable. Her perspectives are flawed and based very much in how she thinks of herself in the world. And her perspective on Martine doesn't necessarily have to be our perspective on Martine. And I love that struggle. I love that argument you were having with her in your head. That's beautiful to me.
Yeah. Another parallel to the Data story is that one of the sort of most emotional Data builds a daughter, basically. Also, a huge part of Martine's story that she is able to butter. And if she hadn't been biological, she probably would have tried to create a child to Data. And a connection just occurred to me.
I love it. I love it so much.
Let's see. Just running through fast. We might have another audience question here. Let me check. Oh, Catherine would like to, what was your favorite scene to write? What were they, so
the question was, what was my favorite scene to write?
Or the
hardest?
Mm-hmm.
I feel that this software is actively trying to come between us because I feel like every time you start to say the word that's going to define the question you're asking, you cut out. But okay, my favorite scene to write or the hardest. I'm trying to answer this without spoiling anything. My favorite scene to write was a scene in which Evelyn and Martine have to collaborate on a particularly difficult and violent moment of developing something in the lab together.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
I don't think I can say more specifically about it without giving away, but I can say I love horror. I love reading and watching horror. I am a huge fan on every level. And I love writing horror in many ways. Everything that I write contains elements of horror, which it's really funny to me when people realize that. They're like, wait a minute, this book is almost like a horror novel. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. Everything I write is about trauma. So the moments when I get to lean into that are my favorite. And definitely influenced the project that I've been working on recently, which is a lot more in that genre and includes a lot more of that violence, because I finished writing this book and I was like, ooh, that felt nice. Let's explore that a little more.
I mean, there's certainly a lot of horror elements in this sci-fi. But I was not bothered by the genre. Really fit together well.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad that it wasn't jarring, because it's really just like where I drift.
Yeah. Oh, also, I believe congratulations are in order. I read today that the book has been successfully optioned for film. What does that feel like?
Oh my God. Such a relief to have the announcement out there. This kind of thing takes a long time to travel through, all these like little systems of pipes to get from deal closing to announcement. And I'm so thrilled to be able to talk about this. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I'm going to be working with Annapurna Features, who created famously the film Sorry to Bother You and Hustlers and so many other brilliant features, to develop The Echo Wife for a feature film. I'm signed on as an executive producer. Everyone who I've spoken with at Annapurna is brilliant and thoughtful and kind. They really understand the book and are really committed to bringing it to screen in a faithful way, that's, faithful to the emotional heart of the book, which they really understand. I'm so honored to be working with them. I can't even tell you what a dream come true it is. And yeah, we announced that today. And so today has been it's been a big day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when I was reading the book, I kept thinking, this is or something, or a longer series. I mean, it's so well, but which is not to say that it's a wonderful book, but I think it'll be a great film too.
Well, that's so much how I write. I mean, I never write a book thinking I want this to be a movie. I think that that's a really dangerous way to approach writing. But film and television has so influenced the way that I plot and write books. Every chapter break for me is a commercial break where my reader might put the book down and walk away, and I want them to come back. And so, it makes so much sense to me that someone would read this and think, oh, this is like a movie, because that's so much how I plot and structure my work. It's like I'm watching a television show inside my own skull and then describing it to the reader.
That's great. Same vein, do you have like particular actors and actresses in the role, as your characters?
Unfortunately, I can't talk about that right now, but I definitely have some people who I would be very excited to see in those roles, and to hopefully things will go in a direction where I can talk about who those people are sooner rather than later. I wish that I could say more, but I think I'm not allowed to.
Yeah, I'm totally understand. Are you going to be able to help with the writing of the film?
So we are talking to some really brilliant people about the screenplay. In my role as executive producer, my understanding, and I'm not super literate in how films are made, so please take this with a big grain of salt, but my understanding is that I will be able to consult and provide insight into characters and plot points, and hopefully help whoever we end up bringing on to write the screenplay to make a really beautiful adaptation. I'm not a screenwriter, and so when we were discussing this, basically I said, like, get someone who's good at the job. Like, I don't want my first ever screenplay to be me trying to adapt this book that I care so much about for a feature film. Like, woo, too much pressure.
Yeah. That's totally fair. I better end with another audience question. Andy's Bookstore always likes to ask what you're reading right now.
Ooh. I just finished reading a book, and so I'm gonna talk about that one. I'm gonna be horrible because it's not out yet. It's available for pre-order everywhere that books are sold, and you can request it directly from independent bookstores or your local library already. It's called A Dark and Starless Forest by Sarah Hollowell. It is her young adult fiction debut, and it is about a kind of assembled family of young girls and non-binary people who have magic powers, who are being kept in a house in the woods by this man who's researching them and who says that the world is too dangerous for them and they can't go out into the world. He has to protect them. And then they start going missing. And the main character of the book, Derry, is trying to find out what's been happening to them. It's an incredible, powerful, beautiful story. It's so much about reclamation of power and abuse dynamics and found family and existing family and coming into one's own. The main character is a young, fat woman who is angry at the world and doesn't know what to do with her anger. And she is one of the most powerful characters I've ever read. It's brilliant. Absolutely blew me away. Strongly recommend a pre-order. A Dark and Starless Forest by Sarah Hollowell, and that's coming out this fall. And then I will also, because whenever I do that horrible thing of talking about books that aren't out, I try to also tell people about a book that is out so that I'm not just being a monster. Yep. I have been recently reading A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martine. It's the sequel to her Hugo Award-winning debut novel, A Memory Called Empire. And that came out on Tuesday. And it's an intricate space opera. It's about diplomacy and colonialism and what happens when an empire comes up against a truly alien force that isn't interested in any of the things the empire is interested in. And I mean, it's brilliant. There's a reason that the first one won a Hugo, and I would be shocked if this second one isn't also lauded widely for the incredible, intricate world building.
Space opera sounds right up my alley. Wow. And it's I know so for a fact that that book is available at Auntie's bookstore. So Spokane locals, better go pick it up. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for your time this evening, Sarah. It's been a real joy to hear more about the book.
Well, thank you. This has been wonderful. I'm so glad to get to talk to you again.
Yeah. The Echo Wife is available at Auntie's bookstore as well, so better reserve your copy as soon as you can because I have a feeling it's going to go fast. But yeah, what a joy, and well, what a great book.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are you kidding? This is great. A space opera. Love that recommendation. And Sarah, and for you to be here virtually is great. I wish I was drinking wine with you in person, but trust that Spokane is on the list when you're allowed to travel again. And we end most of our, all of our book club events with a raffle. We figured out how to do it virtually. For those of you that are in either California or also Maryland, I saw somebody, Arizona has registered for tonight. That's great. This is the coveted Spokesman-Review Andy Warhol print. And so everybody, there's about 50 of you that registered for tickets. We have you on a wheel of names. So please bear with me as we share a screen. The first raffle will be for the print. The second part of the raffle will then be for a copy of The Echo Wife. So please hold as I share screen. Ta-da! And we spin. Victoria Connor. Fantastic. Victoria Connor is the, we'll figure out how to get that to you. Second spin. Oh, how lucky are you, Victoria? I think it's fair. Win a copy of that. There we go. Stop sharing screen, and we're good. I think it's fair that you get both a copy of the print and the book. We'll make sure that's taken care of. Thanks you so much for being with us tonight on Northwest Passages. We have an upcoming Northwest Passages special event tomorrow afternoon with Brian White. Ed Condren will be talking to him about the upcoming concert Heartstrings benefit with Multicare. And then other book club events will be happening. Please check our website for those dates and buy your copy of The Echo Wife from Auntie's Books. Thanks so much.
Volcano eruptions aren't merely events of legend. Sometimes they happen in your own backyard. This momentous occasion's 40th anniversary was this year and was the prompt for the Spokesman-Review's Summer Stories series, featuring 17 stories from authors around the region. Compiled into a book for the first time, sponsored generously by STCU. All of the profits from the sale will be donated to Spark Central. Thanks for joining us today. All of our videos and discussions are archived on our videos site, which you can access for free. If you feel compelled to buy a ticket, please take that cash and instead make a contribution to the Community Journalism and Civic Engagement Fund via the Inovia Foundation. We appreciate your support.